So my gas vandag op GROOTplaas is professor Adrian Tordiffe en hy is 'n veterinary wildlife specialist at Animal Rescue and Rehabilitation Centre Vantara en dit is in India en hy's ook 'n extraordinary lecturer by die Universiteit van Pretoria. Adrian, thank you so much for chatting to us this morning.
Thank you very much.
So let's start off with this amazing procedure you guys had to go and do. You did this together with Professor Gerard Steenkamp. You guys went to Cambodia, and this is kind of an unusual procedure because I've never personally heard of animal, especially an elephant, having its tusk dentically, I think that's the word, removed. Tell us a little bit about the procedure.
Yeah, so this is a very specialized procedure that we've been doing for the last sort of 15 years. I mean, we're not the only people in the world that have done it, but I think we certainly have now, as a team, have done more tusk extractions and more dental procedures on elephants than anyone else. And it's purely because it has so many challenges, just because of the sheer size of the animal, the sheer size of the teeth. I mean, a tusk in a big African elephant bull can be over 1/2 meter that it extends from at the lip all the way back into the actual skull. So that's about 1/2 meter of tooth root that has to be removed in order to get the tusk out. So that's the one challenge. The big other challenge is obviously knowing how to anesthetize an elephant. There are many of my colleagues in South Africa who dart elephants, immobilize them for short procedures to load them onto trucks and move them around and, put collars on them and so on. But to keep them down for 3 or 4 or sometimes 5 hours, and then have them get up and be alive and well after that is quite a challenge.
So I don't think you had a very big dentist chair there to make this extraction happen, because that would be quite impressive. But a tusk extraction like this, what are the main reasons that an elephant would have its tusk removed?
So tusk is just an incisor tooth. It's it's the same as any other tooth, except that it actually is on the outside of the mouth, and then it has this extraordinary size. But it has a pulp canal. So if you have a root canal treatment as a human, the same root canal exists inside a tusk. And when elephants break their tusks, which they do in the wild occasionally, but in captivity, it's relatively common if they either fighting or if they rub the tooth against or break it off on metal or often concrete. Then they expose the root and the nerves and the blood vessels inside the actual root canal, and then that becomes infected. And that's probably the most common reason for us to have to do an extraction. If we get to the tooth very quickly, within a few weeks, we can actually do what we call a partial pulpectomy, where we actually can save the tooth and essentially do part of a root canal just to keep the tooth healthy, and it will continue to grow. But if the infection has set in and destroyed most of the pulp, then that tooth just becomes a chronic source of infection and pain for the elephant. And in those cases, then it is better to actually remove the tooth. Unfortunately, in many situations, these animals learn to live with this chronic pain. But you can imagine, anyone who's had a sore tooth will know what that pain is like. And there's no reason for us to believe that it's any different in an elephant. And just because of the sheer size, it should be a whole lot more painful. But they learn to live with it. What choice do they have? So, people used to just leave these and not do anything about them. And we've been trying to very much change that perception and, show people that it can be done. And that the animals do a lot better after we've completed the procedure.
Can you quickly just explain how do you detect these things? Because most of these animals walk around in the wild. How do you identify that an elephant actually has a toothache?
We've done 1 or 2 wild elephants. We did one in Pinda in northern KwaZulu-Natal, and that elephant actually was just very grumpy. I mean, he was chasing cars, causing havoc with visitors to a park. But in captivity, it's very often the case that the people know about the problem because they are in such close contact with the elephant. They treat them every day. They look at them every day. They can see that the tusk is fractured, and they can often see that there's pus and some discharge coming out of the tusk. And so they know that there's a problem there, and often they will, try and treat it. The worst thing that you can do is to try and treat it with antibiotics, because it never will actually resolve. You need, sometimes they just treat them topically. They will actually just put some stuff in there to try and stop the infection from getting any worse. But ultimately, that's just a temporary fix. Ultimately, the tusk has to be removed in order to solve the pain.
All right, Adrian, we're going to be back with you in a second. Bly ingeskakel, ons is nou weer terug, maar net gou eers vinnig gekyk na die Grootplaas kalender.
FR Plus, grow and guard your wealth.
Welkom terug hier by Grootplaas. Ons gesels met professor Adrian Tordiffe wat 'n tusk extraction gedoen het in Kambodja op 'n olifant. Nou dit is 'n reuse taak om die minste te sê, maar ons het al 'n bietjie gehoor wat die uitkoms daarvan was en hoe dit gebeur het. Now, professor, if you leave something like this untreated, what could happen to the animal?
Well, very often they just live with this infection for years and years and years, and it's just a source of chronic pain. It causes a lot of distress to the animal, but I said, what choice do they have? I mean, they just carry on. There are cases where such tusk infections have actually then, the bacteria have spread from the infection in the tusk to the rest of the body and actually resulted in the death of the animal. So these animals can die if the infection gets really bad. But the real problem is just the pain and the suffering that the animal has to endure whilst it waits for the actual treatment to happen. And in many cases, they don't ever get the treatment because people don't, know that they can actually do this kind of procedure. It's not very rare that actually any elephant gets anesthetized properly in Southeast Asia. We would often do standing sedations and stuff like that. But a big tusk extraction like this, you can't really do without a full general anesthetic.
So you mentioned the anesthesia now, and interesting, this specific case, there was anesthesia for the procedure as well. How complex is that when it needs to be done to an animal of this size?
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges. The sheer size, you're talking about an animal, this case it was about 3.7 tons, the female, but we can go up to 5.5, up to 6 tons in some of the African elephant bulls. And, with that sheer size, when they collapse, when they fall down, when you anesthetize them, a number of things can happen. In the short term, it's not really a problem. We use very potent opioid anesthetic drugs, where you only need a small volume of drug, to get a big animal like that down. But then the biggest problem is that their sheer body weight and size, they crush their legs. They're lying on their legs for 2 or 3 hours. And if that leg is completely numb after 2 or 3 hours, then they can't move the leg. And if they can't move the leg, they won't be able to stand up. And if they can't stand up, then that's it. Then it's game over. They're going to die. The other problem is to make sure that they are ventilated. It's you can't manipulate them. When we do tusk surgery, we are trying to work on a particular side, and we have to make sure that the elephant falls on the correct side so that Professor Steenkamp can get good access to the actual tusk. If it falls on the same size that he wants to work on, then we have to, if we don't, try and roll the elephant over. And that really has its own risks if we have the equipment to be able to do it. Because, they're just too heavy for people to be able to do it without heavy lifting equipment and heavy lifting, machinery, cranes, and so on. So that's the big sort of challenge. So getting them down is usually not too much of a problem. Getting them down on the correct side, and then after 3 or 4 hours sometimes getting them back up again, that's the big challenge.
So this is obviously quite a lengthy procedure due to the size of the animal, but how long did the surgery take?
So in this case, we were really fortunate. It only took about an hour and a half. But the problem is that you often don't know how long it's going to take until you've got the animal properly anesthetized and you've started to probe around and try and determine what exactly is going on inside that tusk socket. So here, the infection had been long-standing and the tooth had actually loosened to some extent by itself. So Professor Steenkamp really didn't have too much trouble in getting this tooth out. But in the past, we've been to the United States before, where we've had to do, it's taken 2 4-hour procedures to get a single tusk out of an African elephant bull. And there's an elephant in Poland that we had to go to 3 times to actually get a very, very large tusk out. So the challenge too is that you can't just anesthetize it once and then come back tomorrow and do it again and so on. And a procedure like this takes almost about a week of our time in terms of traveling to the place, setting up everything, getting everybody organized, doing the procedure, and then doing the post-operative care and so on. And so if anything goes wrong, it often means that the procedure then has to be delayed and we come back again, a few weeks or months later.
What is the recovery process for the elephant, and is there any aftercare that needs to happen once you guys have left?
Yeah, you can imagine. I mean, we leave a huge hole, a big socket that is now completely empty. But fortunately for us, the tusks are on the upper jaw and the hole is facing down. And from a medical point of view, that's actually really good because it means that any discharge that develops in the socket drains out very, very effectively. So very often we just have to manage the elephant with some painkillers for a few days after the surgery. And it's just remarkable how quickly they respond. And you can see that within a few days of the extraction, they actually are way better than they were before we did the procedure. So what the guys here would do is just flush it out with just normal tap water. They just flush it to keep it clean, and then we just want to prevent any flies from getting in and laying eggs and maggots and things like that, which can sometimes happen as well. So we use a sort of anti-parasitic medication on the outside, and then it will just take actually sometimes up to 2 years for that hole to close up completely. But we don't even have to use antibiotics as long as they just flush it every day. It's amazing how these animals heal. And as I said, within a week, they are in much less pain than they were before the actual procedure when they still had the tooth and were suffering with the toothache.
Well, it's fantastic to know that there's guys like yourself out there and that you guys are looking after these massively beautiful animals. So thank you for the work that you did there in Cambodia. And I know there are some online images and videos as well of you guys doing the procedure and, spending time with the Cambodian team as well. So if anybody wants to go check that out, they can find that on the internet. Maar dis Professor Adrian Tordiffe en ons het bietjie met hom gesels oor hierdie extraction wat hulle gedoen het van 'n olifanttusk wat bietjie van 'n infeksie gehad het. So volgende keer as jy sit met tandpyn, wees net bly jy's nie so groot soos 'n olifant nie, want die pyn is aansienlik minder. Dis GROOTplaas vir vandag. Ons sien jou weer môre.